it's just showing up every day. And I think that's the biggest, where you kind of almost have to lead by example. As unexciting as that sounds, at least to me, leadership is not sitting behind some big table, like taking phone calls. It's like, no, it's like just doing the work.
If I could go back in my lifetime and say, what's a big mistake? I wish I figured this out earlier.
Ask questions, ask why.
It takes a special leader to help you grow in a certain role.
Doesn't matter how I speak, doesn't matter how I look.
And it holds true as you think big and don't let anybody stop you.
Now that's a success story.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of Success Stories with Steve Cross. I'm the host. Today, coming out of Ohio, we have Chris Berry, the president and CEO of OhioX. Thanks for being on today, Chris.
Hey, Steve, happy to be on, and thank you for having me.
You bet. You bet. Always love to highlight people that are doing great things, especially in our area, in the United States here. So I just want to get right into it. We talk about success stories. Obviously, that's a topic, but take me to where's the beginning of your success story? Does it begin, childhood? Does it begin college? Does it begin last year? Where do you see that journey and begin? Where to begin at?
Yeah, well, nice of you to suggest that I've had success, because some days it doesn't, when you're building something new, it doesn't feel like that. And so, but I suppose it's all relative. And, I would say at its most basic level, my success is probably attributed to that I was born in the United States of America when I was born, to the two parents that I was born to. It is, kind of cheesy as maybe that sounds to start. Like I really believe that. And, I think there's a lot of luck in success, and it's where you're born, when you're born, to whom you're born. Life would be a lot different if we were born 300 years ago, and there's nothing that either you or I, Steve, had to say over that. And so, that kind of getting beyond that, I would say, I've been pretty lucky with some of the jobs I've had in my career, and opportunity to start it out in Washington, D.C., which really, kind of then leads to the next and leads to the next. And so, had you asked me 5 or 6 years ago, would I be doing this? I would kind of look at you like you were nuts. This was certainly not part of the plan. And, it didn't exist as an organization, what I do and run now. And so, it's been pretty fun to kind of be along, this journey, although it's not always, seeing around the corner isn't always easy historically, I guess. But it's been fun. And so I've been lucky with some jobs, some good bosses, learned a lot. And then, just kind of when seeing an opportunity, going after it, and, getting to do what I do today now.
Yeah. Yeah. And you started that journey in Ohio, right? And then you went away down to DC. Have you been, since you came back from DC, have you been in Ohio, or did you have other stops along the way?
No, and I wasn't in DC all that long, but I grew up in northeastern Ohio in the Akron area, and then went to school in southwestern Ohio at Miami University. And when I was there, I've always been a history and kind of government nerd, and like in biographies of presidents and all that type of stuff. And so when I was in college, had the opportunity to intern in Washington, D.C. for a summer, and I absolutely loved it. It was, a great place to spend 3 months, and so many young people, and people are all across the country and world coming to a place like DC.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, it's not real life when you're out there doing a 3-month internship. And so I loved it. You're just doing social stuff, and, either going to happy hours or playing kickball in the National Mall after work. And there's the White House and the Washington Monument. And so, it's an incredible way to spend a summer. And I would recommend it to any young person, especially, if you can do something in the government space for a little bit and just see what our system and, why it matters, and, people giving back a little bit. But, so I went back to school and then graduated. And then my first job out of college was in DC. And when I went out after graduation, I had thought that I was going to be out there forever. I mean, that's how much I enjoyed the college internship experience, and even the first few months or so. But then, you kind of get settled into, life and work, and you realize that a 3-month internship and, the first few months after college, again, aren't quite real life. Those are kind of by definitions sprints, and you're kind of trying to take it all in. And so then when I got a bit settled in, I would say, to the role into the city and just kind of a, postgraduate life, I kind of quickly realized that I didn't love living in the city. I enjoyed the work a lot and had a lot of great friends, but missed Ohio and missed, being closer to family and all of that. And so, a bit into it, kind of realized that I wanted to make my way back to Ohio and, at some point I did after a couple of years. And then, yeah, since I've moved back, I've been in Ohio, now in Columbus, where I've lived for, 15 years or so. So this is,
Yeah.
Definitely home, and a place I love, but spend my time all across the state. Still have family in Northeastern Ohio and family in Southwestern Ohio. And so between my work and travel in the state and family and travel in the state, I'm definitely, very much an Ohioan at this point, to say the
Yeah,
least.
for sure. Yeah, sure. You've seen it. I feel like you've seen every corner of it,
Oh, yeah.
every nook and cranny as much as you're on the road. Now, when you wanting to get into government, I'm assuming you didn't want to be a politician, but you kind
No.
of, I mean, the government basically is politicians, in my view, my
Yeah.
biased view, jaded view, I guess. So where were you thinking you would fall at, like going through there? Did you just like the idea of the government position and the inner workings of it? Because like it's a different world than private or even nonprofit, the world.
Yeah, it is. I would say also though, well, one, growing up, my favorite subjects were history and,
Hmm.
those types of schooling areas. And so that, that's the real basis of, what I like. And even today, the books I read and the stuff on Netflix, it's about, a lot of it's history. And I find it fascinating. I like to, learn about that aspect, and I'll go down different rabbit holes of different periods of time. And so, I think there's kind of a natural connection between a lot of history and then, current day government. And so, that's probably where the interest and passion and, learning about that, spending time studying it in school is just, again, my favorite subject. But I also, when I had gotten involved in that world and, kind of my internships and first job out of school, that was really like as a lot of the social media were taking hold. And so, yeah, I kind of saw firsthand this like shift of newspapers, and that was the big
Mm,
thing in the 5 p.m., you coming from this space, like the 5 p.m. deadlines, and then it would be
sure.
in print the next day to, I remember when media outlets like Politico, and they still had, free paper copies that you would pick up at the
That's
Metro or
crazy.
in the offices,
Yeah.
but then they start blogging about politics as more of a sport versus covering it, historically how it had been covered. And then, you have Facebook and you have Twitter at the time, that kind of really pick up. And so I was kind of there as that shift happened. And, admittedly, one of the things I just didn't enjoy about it as much as, time progressed is just the polarization of it all. And,
Yeah.
because at least in the history books and all that, you maybe have a perspective as a younger person of, oh, it's more of the West Wing. And, and then some people think it's House of Cards, but in reality, it's probably closer to Veep. And so, it's an interesting,
Yeah.
place to be. But again, being a history buff, there's a lot of perspective that I think that is goofy as the time we're living in now. And, sometimes we feel so divided, like, we've literally fought wars as a country and, a lot of the, Western countries that we love traveling to in the summers as Americans, like France and others, like, it wasn't too long ago that, there was revolutions in the street and beheadings of, French monarchs and all that stuff. And so, I think sometimes kind of historical perspective is good of just how good of a society and how good of a country we get to live in, which again is a bit of melding of history with current day and kind of looking at perspectives. And so, yeah, it's again, I like that stuff and I like history and reading and all of that. And so DC was a natural place, but I missed Ohio and I really
Yeah.
wanted to get back home.
Probably a great experience there that led you to, back
Yeah.
home, but it gave you those qualities and that leadership ability, because going from government to, I feel like probably your positions and then coming back, like you lead OhioX, like it OhioX goes as Chris Berry goes,
Yeah, for good or bad.
especially for the especially for the first few years, right?
Right,
Like
right.
you were
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What in your career path and those were your stops during
Sure.
your career? What what developed? Were there some developments there that gave you the experience of to have the confidence to lead, or were you just, oh, all right, we're doing this, like I'm gonna blind and run, or probably a combination of some of both,
Yeah,
maybe?
a combination of both. One thing in being in government and politics, you see a lot of people, a lot of elected officials and folks that, are leaders and or at least have leadership positions. I had an old boss that said,
I like
a leader without any followers is just a guy out for a walk. And so, today you just have to go on LinkedIn, and the amount of titles that people have that say they're leaders, and it's, you're kind of like, of what? And so,
yeah, right.
that can be a bit like government, where, something like the House of Representatives in DC, it's 435 members, and it's a true representation of America. You got smart people, you got interesting people, you got really nice people. Maybe you have some folks that aren't as nice. And so, but even within there, you see how different, members of Congress lead or choose not to lead, or are good leaders or not so good leaders. And so I've had the opportunity to work for a couple very good bosses, which in a lot of ways is just, my luck of the draw of just, being in college and kind of being around, a certain office and, doing an internship that led to a job, et cetera. And so, you pick up a lot of, just secondhand. And so, I mean, when I was in DC, I was, 22 plus and not a leadership role in any way, shape, or form. I was the most junior person there. And when you're doing that, you're answering calls and helping out interns and, doing pizza delivery to late night congressional votes and hoping you can have a slice or two after, because you're not making much money. And so, it's probably more so for young people, not assuming you have to kind of lead in a kind of a, maybe what you would see in a textbook definition, but you can lead through actions, and you can also, study of successful people or people maybe you really respect or don't respect, and how they do it, and either doing it how they do it or how they don't do it. And so that's probably been the biggest, is just seeing what that looks like in terms of seeing people, especially working in government. Those are oftentimes very public facing roles where the news media cares about what you're doing, and they'll applaud you or try to take you down and kind of do editorials against you and call you out. And so you kind of see all sides to it. And that's, I think been very, influential and just what I do and what I do now of just, seeing, I had a boss that said, called it servant leadership, where, you really have to think about it in that manner. And that was something that was really big in the office as a theme for, we had these yearly themes after like a retreat. And I remember servant leadership was, the phrase that really came out of that. And so, yeah, you kind of study, you see what people are doing. And then, the biggest is we're still a small organization, so it's not like we have a huge team, and I just sit around hanging out, having conversations. And so you get humbled pretty quickly when you're showing up at 7 a.m. to make sure that the chairs are set up and the coffee's getting delivered, because, you can't have too big of britches and think you're some, LinkedIn influencer leader, when you're doing all that little stuff on a, very early morning, especially in the winter in Ohio.
Yeah, anything that needs done, right? You got to step up and do it. Yep. I think one of the key things I picked up on there is that you don't have to have the title to be a leader, right? You can lead from any title, any position, anywhere in an organization. You can lead. You just need to have the mindset and the gumption to do it.
Yeah. Although I think also, though, you don't need the title, and you can lead through example, but at the same token, like in professional sports, and this is a football state, leaders and captains are nearly always the quarterback, because they have the ball in their hands, right? And so if you're the fourth stringer, your leadership is probably going to look and feel a little bit different than if you're Tom Brady. And that's kind of, I guess, the Rudy example, where he just proved himself by showing up every single day to practice. And he wasn't trying to give rah-rah speeches, but he was doing it through, just his actions. And so, I think you kind of also have to have a little bit of, just kind of understand your role on the team. And again, I've had, jobs where I was the most junior person delivering the pizza. And even today, like, just because I may have a title of president and CEO, we're still a small team. So I do a little bit of it all, but you just have to, I think, be mindful of, what your role is, and speaking up when, opportunities arise, and, kind of just taking those leadership opportunities as they come, as opposed to trying to maybe force them. Because I think I've seen that. I've, either being
Being
myself
authentic.
or,
Yeah.
in previous jobs, you work with like a ton of interns, for instance, and, there'd some come in and they'd be trying to act like that they're the chief of staff and the top dog in the office. And it's like, hey, buddy, like, I'm not, like, you're certainly
Yeah.
not. And,
Yeah.
and so, like, let's just, chill a little bit.
Yeah.
But then you see some really good, right, where it's like they're, it's like, wow, that's a fantastic addition to the team. And, you still, at least I do, I still remember some of them from 15, almost at this point, 20 years ago. And so, yeah, it's kind of knowing your position on the team. A point guard's different than a power forward and a center, and quarterback's different than a kicker and a punter. And, freshman, who's trying to make their way on the field is a little bit different than a senior who's been around and started for 3 years.
Yeah.
But each can do it, whether, again, you're a Rudy example or, maybe a Tom Brady.
Love it. So let's talk about OhioX here a little bit. But before we get into your day to day and what the organization's mission is, what looking back now, how long have you been with OhioX?
Yeah, so we
It
officially launched in December of 2019. So
19. That's right.
five
Yeah,
and
right
a half
before COVID,
years.
yeah.
But as we'll all remember when COVID hit just shortly after, in early 2020. And so, not to get too far ahead, but it kind of paused it in a little way. So even though on paper we're 5 years, we're probably closer to 4, or so, give or take.
Yeah. So looking back on those 5 years at the beginning, what are some key traits that you acquired during your career before you got there, where that set you up for success, or whether it be during your professional career or personally growing up, and becoming a professional? And then let's talk about those good things first. But I also want to get into, where were your gaps? Where did you think or not realize? Maybe some things you're probably like, oh, I knew I didn't know this.
Yeah.
But then there's some other times you get into a leadership position or certain positions. I feel like we've all like gotten to a position or a job where we're like, oh, I thought I was ready for this, but I was not expecting this point or this, aspect of it. Can you talk through some of those wins and losses?
Yeah,
And how you overcame?
In the early days of OhioX, and I guess our founding is different than most organizations. So OhioX, we're a statewide technology trade association, which is equivalent of essentially a technology chamber of commerce. And we started for a few reasons, but one of which was there wasn't anything quite like it. And when I was in government in my last stop, I saw how other sectors and industries across the state do have statewide organizations. And why does that, matter, and why kind of my founding, inspiration in part was we were doing a lot of tech projects. And as part of that, it was, well, what does tech look like in Ohio? And we're working with fintechs out of Atlanta and San Francisco-based technology companies. Well, what is here? And it was really tough to figure that out because there wasn't like a front door, I guess you could say. There wasn't anything doing this on a statewide basis. And when you work in state government, naturally your first stop would be a statewide organization. And so for, an example would be the Farm Bureau, right? If we're doing something around agriculture, you'd reach out to the Farm Bureau, or we were putting the state's checkbook online. And so we were working with the Ohio Society of CPAs, for instance. I remember, our office interacting with them a bunch. And so, that was kind of the void that we had and why we started, but how we started is a bit different also, in that most groups like us, certainly in Ohio historically, or other states that do this for tech, and tech's a bit of a newer industry. It's not like agriculture or restaurants or manufacturing that, a lot of those types of groups have been around for 100 years. Groups like OhioX and other states, most are in the 10 to 20, 25-year-old range. And so just as an industry, it's a bit younger because, tech is tech, and, computers have only been a thing for so long compared to agriculture, which is, always been around. And so for us, groups like us, I should say, in other states typically have started by like the government in the state, in their states, or like the big economic development organizations say, hey, we need to build out this sector, and here's a bunch of money. Or they'll have, 5 or 10 like larger businesses that say, hey, we need to build out our tech sector and we need to like work on things collectively and as an
Spearhead it,
organization. Yeah. Like here's some money. And we didn't have that.
Which is crazy to think. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it's infancy in the industry here,
I think
but
it's because
it's
there's
still
a lot
amazing
of
to think that it
there's been
didn't
a lot of
already exist.
investment more locally in the different regions, and so I think that was probably why it's like, oh, we're doing all this stuff in the Clevelands and Columbuses and Cincinnati's and Dayton's, and there's a lot of momentum and organization, and Youngstown having groups like YBI, but yeah, it didn't really exist on a statewide, and so but we started a third way, which was probably dumb, and that's we just did it, and
Just
so
did it.
a small group of us, and I kind of was the one person pushing it to do it in this model because I had seen the void firsthand. Whereas you get tech people in a room and you could do it as just an informal group or a for-profit company or something. I was like, no, like let's do it as a nonprofit trade organization so we can work on some of these things. And this is why. And so again, we ended up doing it, but we didn't have like funding. And so it was paying things out of pocket. And, when you travel the state and tell people about it, there's no place to get a reimbursement like in previous jobs. And so it was very different in that sense. And I would say the biggest thing, I learned through that is, no one gave us like quote unquote permission. Again, there wasn't some act of like a legislature or like, I think a lot of people will sometimes think like there's some, private room that we're part of and like people are giving us like, it's like, no, it's like, if you see me set up chairs at events, like you realize there's no like fancy boardroom with, cigar smoke or anything like that. And so I would say the biggest thing that I learned is just like showing up every day, and you have to be consistent because in the 5 years we've been doing this, a lot of people reach out with new ideas or, hey, I'm going to spin up this. And like very few are around for 5 years. And I've started and stopped stuff too. So like, I very much get that not everything continues, but it's just showing up every day. And I think that's the biggest, where you kind of almost have to lead by example in that sense, is unexciting as that sounds, where at least to me, leadership is not sitting behind some big table, like taking phone calls. It's like, no, it's like just doing the work. And, hopefully then people want to come and be part of it. And you just put one step in front of the next. And, the other is just kind of building a coalition of good people. And I'd put you in this bucket, Steve, of, early on this was just an idea. A lot of people, more people than not, thought that this was stupid, or they didn't get it, or they didn't think it was maybe worthwhile. And I'm sure there's still a lot that think that, which is fine. But you just find you find your kind of tribe or your community of early adopters, and you rely on them. But that said, like, not everyone's going to have the passion, just like any company or any, cause. And so there's probably going to be a few people that, are doing, the chair setups again. Right. And then you just try to leverage people at their strengths that are really good at certain things in certain areas, and bring them into the fold. And so, the biggest is showing up every day, trying to get good people to lend support or help out or whatever that might look like. And in that process, you kind of look up and it's, oh, wow, it's been 5 years. But you also fail a lot. And there was a lot of things that we would try and it didn't work, or, we would attempt and you'd see that there wasn't traction, or it didn't make sense, or maybe what we thought the organization would do 5 years ago, we're not doing it now for certain reasons. And so, we always tried to fail fast, which is, kind of a startup thing in smaller areas, but also we never overextended ourselves. And one of the blessings, as I guess the final comment, was we started in COVID essentially, which gave us about 2 years to build up a recognition and people following us and subscribing and getting involved digitally and virtually. So when we did be able to do things in person, people showed up and they were excited and they knew what to expect. Because had we never had COVID, and I remember we were going to try to do like these, tours with live podcasts and go to different breweries across the state. And there probably would have been 2 people that showed up, and it probably would have like bankrupted us, and we would have gone out of business. You can't spend $2,000 to record a podcast at a brewery in 10 different cities, $20,000 when you don't have any money and no one shows up. And so that was the blessing in disguise, I would say, is that we did have time. And when we were trying things and failing things, like if you remember Clubhouse, for instance, the media app, which was like all the rage in COVID for like 6 months, we were doing weekly Clubhouses just to try it out. But like at the end of the day, it wasn't a big deal if like people stopped showing up because it didn't cost us anything. It was just time. And so, a lot of trial and error, and just trying to figure out what would kind of work and stick and what served, our community and helped grow our community. So, a lot of lessons definitely were learned over the past few years.
Yeah. And I've heard some things about like your brewery tours and
Yeah.
the clubhouses. If they would have been successful, if you would have been great at it, then you probably waited too long to do it.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
if you're not if you do something the first couple times, you should be not great at it.
Yep.
And if you wait and you wait and wait and you build in the background until you are great at it, then you probably waited too long and you should have been out there and you could have escalated your momentum a little bit faster there. So
Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah. But well, let's talk about your day to day now at OhioX and kind of what you do, and give us a little bit more about what OhioX, the mission is of the group.
Sure.
And kind of what you guys do.
Yeah, so the mission, to talk about the organization first, is to build Ohio's tech hub, and we do that through connecting, promoting, and advocating for its growth. And so, our 3 pillars: connect, promote, and advocate. On the connect side, events, programs, gatherings, and that's everything from roundtables with senior technology executives to a CEO retreat in September, to our big conferences that attract almost 800 people this past year, which set our record for us, to startup happy hours, which anyone can come to and are free, to we do a road show which we make different stops at different places across the state that are doing cool things in tech and innovation, and bring our community to tour them and check them out. And so, on that, we've done NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, and Path Robotics in Columbus, and the Cleveland Zoo, because they're doing some cool stuff with AI and drones and analytics and sensors and all sorts of technologies. And so, try to make it easier. But the general thesis of our work is, there's all these metro areas. We're really spread out. We have a big state, but we're not like Atlanta, Georgia, or Chicago, Illinois, or New York, New York, where you have one big metro and then everything else. And so in those types of states, nearly all the technology is happening in that big metro, where our state, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, Toledo, Akron, Canton, Youngstown, a few others that, there's actual tech happening, and there's hubs, and there's investment, and there's excitement, and there's people doing cool things. And we're just spread out. And so, growing up in just even northeastern Ohio, of growing up in Greene between Akron and Canton, those are 2 distinct regions. Then you go up to Cleveland, that's a distinct city and region. And then you go to Youngstown. And so that's just northeastern Ohio. And then you add the rest of the state. So our work is taking what's already happening, because there's so much good, and just making it easier from city to city. And as we started, one of the big reasons was people would say, hey, I'm in Cleveland, and it's easier for me to go to Pittsburgh or Detroit and open up a market, or to meet people and expand my tech network and business opportunities, than it is to go to Columbus or Cincinnati or Dayton. And it's like, that it shouldn't be the case. We haven't solved it, but we're, chipping away every day. And so that's why we, exist and do what we do, to open it up, to celebrate, to promote, and again, connect, promote, and advocate. So the connect, bring people together in different formats, forums. Sometimes that's digitally, a lot of times it's in person now. Certainly in COVID, it was all digitally. We were doing Zoom happy hours, all sorts of crazy stuff, that looking back, that we all did, right? But like that,
wine with the wine, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. On the promote side, we like to think of ourselves as industry champions and storytellers. And so we're building out a media arm where we can tell more tech stories directly to people. And we don't want it to be told just in Youngstown, where no one hears beyond Youngstown what's going on, because they don't read the Youngstown business papers. And so we want to create a statewide platform where we can tell these stories directly. And we do it through our media site, ohiotechnews.com. We do podcasts, we do virtual events, big on like LinkedIn, for instance, newsletters. And so we can, break down those regional silos and make it easier to spread the message. And then we also want people outside of the state to hear what's going on, because there's so much that's happening. But historically, there haven't been a lot of outlets for it, or traditional newspapers maybe don't cover technology as much as, the tech sector would hope is in a place like Ohio. And so we're creating out basically this promotional arm so we can promote. We're not journalists. We don't play that important role in society. We're industry storytellers, and we want to promote the companies. We like to say the people, companies, and ideas building Ohio's tech opportunity. And so that's the promote. That's what, I probably spend my most time on, just because the other parts, like the events and the programming, that's kind of I don't want to say a machine at this point, but we have a playbook. And I remember actually something you said to me, Steve, probably about a year, half, 2 years ago. You may not remember mentioning this to me, but it was do it, document it, and delegate it. And so
The 3Ds, man. Yep.
yeah, you mentioned it to me maybe on our podcast, but I still remember that. And that is something that has been a kind of an unofficial theme of our organization. One, because we're small and we literally need to document it, because if I'm sick or out of the office, the work shouldn't stop. But as we have grown and brought on some team members, we have a process. I have done it. We're trying to document it. I'm delegating it now. And then that opens us up to do other things. And so, that's a big kind of thing that we're doing. And then on the advocate is a final pillar to what we do. We can, and this is why we're in the model of a 501c6 trade association, is we can work with government and hope and work to make sure tech has a voice with them. And so that can be everything, from an annual government day at the State House that we do, to inviting elected officials to tour businesses. So we were just with one of our U.S. senators at one of our member organizations in the Columbus area. We've had AI forums with then Lieutenant Governor John Husted, now U.S. Senator Husted. And just, we're still pretty small in terms of the capabilities in that realm. But we've gotten to work on some things and, bring to light that this is an industry and a sector that isn't just a back office function. It's not just IT but this is what is going to help drive Ohio's economy. And so that's what the organization does. And then my kind of day-to-day is pretty varied based on if I'm traveling or not. So this week has been a inside day, essentially, or week, I should say, of just getting stuff done behind the computer. And it's everything from producing podcasts to doing some of our media stuff and helping manage a bit of that, invoicing people for membership dues and sponsorships, and having team calls where we plan and literally pick out the menu for our CEO retreat, in 6 weeks or whatever it is. And so we're a small team, so I do a bit of everything. I've done everything on the team. But that's kind of inside. And then when we have events, so last week we had 3 in-person events in Toledo, Columbus, and Cleveland. So I was on the road for most of it, and you just don't do as much. You don't get as much done when you're doing that, from the computer, background perspective. And so you got to, at least I do, I have to have kind of those out weeks and in weeks where I can, get stuff done. But then also big part of my job, and increasingly so, is to be out and about, whether for our own events, supporting partners and friends and their things, or showing up to make sure, there's a tech representative at, maybe something with government officials, for instance. And so, yeah, it's kind of, it's very varied, but, still a lot of computer work. And, I if I have a half hour in a city and I can stop and grab a few minutes at a coffee shop to do emails or put something out that I need to do, that's a big thing as well.
Yeah. So everything a CEO does, without all the departments under you yet, right? Because you are each department.
Yeah, exactly.
Your finance, your advertising and marketing, your business development.
I get the bank statement emails every day, knowing that we have to pay invoices, but then also, it's carting in all the boxes of T-shirts to a conference, and it's everything in between.
Small in numbers, but mighty in impact, right? Because you guys definitely are. So take me through, what do you see in the future for Ohio, for OhioX, and maybe for the industry here locally? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, well, I think for Ohio, it's an exciting time. And as someone who grew up in northeastern Ohio, and my dad was in the rubber chemical business, and Akron being the rubber and tire capital of the world, like, we have seen as a state, when there's an incredible heyday of jobs and opportunity, and industry is here and investment is here. We've then lived through some times where that has been the opposite. And, again, you see firsthand of what that happens when companies leave, or investment leaves, and opportunity leaves, young people leave. I was an example of that myself for a few years until I came back. But it feels like we're back in the game for the first time in quite a while. there's big headlines of big companies and $1 billion coming to the state that, have been popping up, and that's because of leadership, and not mine, but, economic development leaders and government leaders and public policy officials that have been very intentional of creating these opportunities and positioning Ohio. But that doesn't just happen. So you talk about leadership, there's a lot of lessons in leadership from, for Ohio over the past 6 or 8 years where this wasn't happening before that. And it's like, well, why? And I think a lot of it's hustle and just some of the intangibles our state has. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing in terms of, what all that looks like in the opportunity, and, advanced manufacturing, something that, you're part of the state and where I grew up have, an incredible history on. And so I'm hopeful that we continue to seize this. It's not certain, right? Like we're not,
Right.
even Silicon Valley, right? A lot of people are saying that like San Francisco without AI AI is the reason that city's coming back, and you're seeing some opportunity, you're seeing whether it's venture capitalists or tech companies that maybe went to Austin or Miami or New York, they're starting to go back because that's the AI hub really in the world. And so I think it's, our opportunity or kind of, success is not guaranteed in terms of kind of creating a strong economy where innovation plays a huge role across industries and sectors. But I think we have that opportunity, and we have a lot of good leaders that are positioning. And but I think that's why, our work and the community and the coalition that we're building is because you have to have that private sector of small businesses and startups coming together, and tech companies, that care about things like computer science education, or, making sure tech is thought of as a sector and it's not just something that's like an IT back office function. And so, it's an exciting time we're at, but I think that's when you have to put the pedal to the metal even more, because if you don't, and it's like, being in what was it, the Falcons and the Patriots, and the Falcons are up 23 in the Super Bowl. And they kind of, they let up, and that you see it in sports all the time. And I think that's no different than, a state or a region, and kind of the opportunities we have. It's like, okay, we're seeing it. Other people are noticing. People are choosing to do business here. Some of our neighbors in other states have noticed, and, their governors aren't happy that we keep winning on all these big projects because our officials are really great in this stuff, and they're hustling. And so let's double down and see how much more opportunity we can create. And, hopefully that keeps more kids here, and brings more businesses that want to operate, and it creates hopefully some tech opportunities. And again, all sorts of different sectors and industries all across the state, and it's reaching all corners.
You touched on something there, and I normally go into, what are some words of wisdom that you had from leaders or bosses that you had, or mentors growing up. But I think one of the things that I think you can speak very well about is, how do we convince, and what do we need to do to keep our kids here, right? Because it used to be, I was the same as you. I was growing up, I'm like, when I get it, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm out. But that, like, but I also preach to my kids, when you do get older, leave, because you can always come back.
Yep.
Go get some experience somewhere and bring it back. But that's always the plan, to come back. How do we get people back here that maybe have left, with the new opportunities that are arising? But how do we also keep them here from leaving in the first place?
Yeah.
What initiatives? Because I know you're on the forefront of this, and it's big. It's big in tech.
Yeah. And just like you said, like I don't, because I did it, right? And I think I'm better for it, but you have to have that opportunity to come back. And I think that's something that we're seeing increasingly, and that opportunity will look different to every young person. Some are, maybe wanting to do things that don't require a degree, and some that want to do things that need a 2-year degree, and some are advanced PhDs and want to come back and start things. But it comes back to jobs, because people have to have, even beyond tech, like you just have to have career prospects. And I think that's why, historically we've seen like migrations out of places like the Midwest, and, and more down south or out west. But so it's all jobs. But your point on like come back home, and why does that largely happen? And we see a lot of this is because People will be out in San Francisco or, at some West Coast hub, and then, they're 30 something or 40s and they have a couple kids, and, it's pretty expensive to live out there. And that's not, I don't always love the cost of living argument because, basically like 40 states have that same argument. But the difference is that like you have your family here, right? And so like, if your family is here, your community's here, it's where you grew up. That's how we're going to get most people to decide to come back. But we'll talk with a lot of tech people, for instance, and they'll be in a place like San Francisco or maybe in Austin, and what holds them back is, and I should say, tech can be many, many, many different things.
Right,
but
right,
if
sure.
we're just talking maybe like high growth type startups, like software engineered, kind of like really narrow it down, what causes a lot of hesitation or the inability for someone to actually move back is we don't have enough Series B, Series C, Series D plus tech startups. We have a lot that are very, 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 very early stage where it's one or two people working on something, sometimes full-time, sometimes it's part-time, and they're kind of doing it at night. And then we have a bunch of big companies and enterprise type businesses, but kind of that tech San Francisco, again, to kind of put a mold on it. We
We're
just
not
don't
that
have
mature.
enough.
Yeah,
And because we're spread out, you almost need even more, because if you took all the industries and all the different tech startups and you, from all the big cities, put them in one, that would obviously go a lot longer. But, they'll maybe see a company and they'll say, hey, I'd like to work there. But what happens is, because it's a high growth startup, like people need options, because if it doesn't work out, or, tech startups are hard. And if they decide to, close shop at some point because it's just not clicking and you go try something else, they have to be able to walk down the street and, find 5 or 6 other ones. And so that kind of high growth, high tech, maybe what people would think of Austin and kind of how they've seen a lot of their boom. And it doesn't have to be necessarily headquartered here, because there are some really great examples of like the HQ2s coming in from San Francisco, where San Francisco still their headquarters, but they open up a big Ohio operation. That is something that, I think we need more of. And there's a lot of kind of passion and interest to help that kind of very, very early stage pre-seed, seed founder. But to kind of unlock that next layer of growth, I think that's something that we need to do more of. And I think it's also something that doesn't get enough attention, because a lot of the kind of economic development models are built around jobs, right? And so if you can go get 4,000 jobs for Andrew, like, duh, like that's what you're going to do. But
exactly.
and that would be something I would hope our organization can play more of a role in, of helping recruit some of those types of companies, of, again, the Series B, Series C, Series D, and either attracting them here, having them set up a second headquarters here, because that's that kind of like your, again, your, what you would maybe view like a San Francisco startup being. And then of course, they're the Andurils and the Intels of the world and the data centers, and small businesses. But in terms of like the hyper growth, hyper scale opportunities, we just don't have a lot in terms of, kind of the numbers. And, maybe that's, you can look at venture capital dollars and where they go by state, and regions. And, we certainly lag behind there. And so, I would say that's like one aspect of tech that probably doesn't get enough attention. I hope we can play a role in increasingly as time goes. So yeah, that would probably be kind of,
Gotcha.
one piece, but there's a lot of others, and you
Yeah.
could take that tech, conversation and skills and jobs and move it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So to circle back on your career and maybe mentors or bosses that you had or maybe still have, what are some key takeaways that they gave you that that you want to maybe leave our audience with? Because our audience is a lot of C-suite type of executives and people that aspire to be there. What kind of wisdom that can you impart on them, or words of advice that that have really stuck with you and developed kind of guided you along your path?
Sure. The one of servant leadership, that was a big one from one of my first bosses. And again, I remember being in the staff retreat and, people throwing up different words. And I thought that was a good one. The other one, he had something to say about, don't let them see you sweat, essentially. And it was basically about like, it was in a moment of setback for him, where he basically lost a position in Congress, and was trying to make a comeback, and he was walking out of a vote where didn't go the right way, and just don't let him. We'll work our way back, and I think that's big because for what I do, it's not that. At the end of the day, I'm not doing brain surgery or anything like that. But that said, we do a lot of big events, and I always put a lot of pressure on myself. I don't try to put it on others, but I wish I put maybe probably less pressure on me. Of almost 800 people are going to come and spend a day and take either time off work or invest the time to drive in from a Youngstown or a Toledo or Cincinnati. Like, that. Like I take that really, really seriously, and that's a big responsibility, I think, because again, you want to deliver, and things always go wrong, right? And so, like,
Absolutely.
you just got to keep it cool. So, like, don't sweat, and if there is a setback, it's like, okay, work through it, because no one wants to, hang out with a jerk. And so, if I'm a jerk to volunteers or a team or something, it's like. Like the team will shrink pretty quickly. And so, I would say that is just like, don't sweat it. There's going to be setbacks. Doing what I've done over the past 5 years, like not always easy. And you get a lot of no's, and people thought you're crazy, especially in the very, very early days. Still some now. But you just have conviction and realize that the world's a big place, and a lot of people are creating things and building opportunity. And so, just keep at it, and, do it with a smile on your face, hopefully.
Love it. Love it. Chris, where can people find out more about you, what you're up to, and also follow along with OhioX and
Sure.
Learn more
The
about it and get
website,
involved?
ohiox.org. That's for the organization. And then for me, the biggest and easiest is probably LinkedIn, just Chris Berry, Berry. And so, yeah, that's probably it.
Love it. Love it. Chris, keep up the great work on everything you're doing. I know you don't get probably a lot of praise for everything you do, but those of us that have been following you for years now, even silently in the beginning for the first couple of years before we, iSynergy got involved, or tried, becoming a member, like very commendable what you're doing. And I see the impact.
Thank you.
I hope other people can see the impact. I just want them to get to notice you and the organization and get involved and help out, because everybody can help out in some capacity.
Absolutely.
Even if they're not in tech, tech is big, right?
Yeah,
When you say
100%.
tech, there's a lot of different ways to be involved and get involved. So keep up the great work. And once again, thanks for coming on. I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode, so I appreciate you.
Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And, thanks for what you do. Again, the whole fun of our work is getting to know people like you. And so I appreciate you and everything you're doing, and making sure that, you're part of the states on the map.
Yep. Trying to, trying to do my part. So we could always do more. That's for sure. But all right. Thanks, Chris. Listeners, everybody stick around. More content to come. Make sure you subscribe and stick around. See you soon.